Okay, so it is 6:03. Thank you everyone for joining us for Literary Thursdays. We should have an amazing event. Thank you, Anne, for joining us. And we have our co-hosts, Indira and Shante will start us off. Thank you. Enjoy.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, sorry, I'm having issues with my camera. I'm not sure if you guys can see me, but
Yeah, you look good.
welcome everyone to Literary Thursday. We're just going to start out with a few announcements. We hope you and your family are enjoying back to school season. Visit queenslibrary.org to see all our back to school programs and giveaways and to read our back to school guide full of hopeful information and resources for you and your family as you prepare for the upcoming school year. Each year, Hispanic Heritage Month celebrates the achievements of Hispanic Americans and their contribution to our nation and our culture. Explore our virtual and in-person programs, discover our special Hispanic Heritage book list for all ages, grab a copy of Hispanic Heritage brochure from your local library, and don't miss our Topaz Cultural Art exhibit at Central Library. Visit queenslib.org/blog to learn more. Banned Book Week is September 22nd through September 28th and is more important than ever to stand against censorship and celebrate the freedom to read. Check out our book list, our upcoming programs, and our Banned Books library card design contest. The winning selection will be featured on QPL's first Banned Book Special Edition library card. For more information, visit queenslibrary.org. Lastly, it's Library Card Sign-Up Month. A Queens Public Library card is your key to everything the library has to offer. More than 5 million books, movies, and other media, over 40,000 classes and events per year, more than 5,000 computer workstations all across Queens, and so much more. Visit our website or one of our branches today to apply for your Queens Public Library card. Thank you. I'm now going to turn it over to Indira.
Hello, everyone. Anne Napolitano's most recent novel, Hello Beautiful, was an instant New York Times bestseller and the 100th Oprah Book Club pick. Her previous novel, Dear Edward, was a New York Times bestseller, read with Jena Selection, and was released as an Apple TV Plus series starring Connie Britton. Her other two novels are A Good Hard Look and her debut novel, Within Arm's Reach, which was reissued with a new cover in April 2024. She was the associate editor of One Story Literary Magazine from 2014 to 2020. She received an MFA from New York University. She has taught fiction writing for Brooklyn College's MFA program, New York University School of Continuing and Professional Studies, and for Gotham Writers Workshop. She lives in Brooklyn with her husband and two sons. Take it away, Anne.
Thank you for having me, and thank you to everyone who's here. I'm just going to talk a little bit about how Hello Beautiful came to be, and then answer any questions that anyone has. So I have to talk about my process first. And so for my last two books, what works best for me is that once I get an idea, like an initial idea for the book, and the first idea that I had for Hello Beautiful was this image of a lonely little boy dribbling a basketball. And at that point, I set a invisible timer inside myself for 9 months. And for the next 9 months from when I have the first idea, I am not allowed to write what I call pretty sentences. And that's my favorite thing to do. and what I mean by writing pretty sentences is I will write a scene and sort of follow the lyricism of the language, and characters will come in and say things that I didn't expect them to say, and things will happen that I didn't expect to happen. And that's really fun. That's like being a reader. Obviously, it's an act of discovery. But while I'm writing like that, I cannot think like analytically at all. I can't figure anything out. And so what I have found works best is if I make this isolated 9 months at the beginning where I'm not allowed to write, but all I can do is think, research, and take notes. So I think about this book that I'm trying to figure out as much as possible. I have ideas, I take notes, I write them down. And so during that period, the things that I sort of knew or figured out was that I was going to write about basketball. I had developed an obsession with the history of basketball over the couple of years before I started writing. I actually had started reading about social justice, and I had been really interested to see how the history of basketball in America really ran parallel with the civil rights movement, and often overlapped with it, with figures like Bill Russell and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. He was Lou Alcindor beforehand. And so I knew that basketball was going to be in the book. I wasn't really sure how, but I did know that this little boy who was going to be at the start of the book was named William, and basketball was going to be part of his life. I also knew that I wanted to write about like a pack of sisters. And that's really, I think, because when I was growing up, my best friend was a girl named Leah. She's still one of my best friends. And I used to sleep at her house like half of the week. And her mother has 6 sisters, and they used to come in and out of the house all the time. And they're all about 5 foot tall. They're Italian American, and they all had slightly different versions of the same face. And I used to watch them like they were a television show. And the coolest thing to me was that when they were all together, they seemed more themselves than they did when they were apart. And I wanted to see if I could write the magic of that kind of sisterhood. And I also knew that the book was going to be set in Chicago, a city that I've never lived in. But when I was growing up, my mother comes from a large Irish Catholic family. And all my aunts and uncles lived around us in New Jersey, except for one. My Uncle Ed lived in Chicago and had moved there before I was born. And when I was little, he would send me postcards with like the Chicago skyline on them. And he would always address them to, it would say, "Hello, beautiful." And I knew when I was little that he didn't really know what I looked like because he had like 20 million nieces and nephews. And so I felt like he was seeing that I was beautiful on the inside. And since I was a very shy, bookish child, I felt like if I did have any beauty, that was where it was. So those greetings always made me feel really good. And I had the thought that the father in the novel, Charlie, that's how he would greet his 4 daughters every time he saw them, that he would say, "Hello, beautiful." And I went and interviewed an NBA physio. I read more about basketball. I researched mental health treatment in the 1980s, which is relevant to the novel. I figured out as much as I could. And then when the alarm inside me went off, and the beauty of that in general is that like I'm so excited to write by the time that timer goes off that I like leap into the novel like with glee, basically. But the 9-month timer went off, and when it went off, it was April 2020. And I'm sure you guys remember April 2020, the very beginning of the pandemic. And obviously we all live in I live in New York City, I live in Brooklyn. And, there were sirens going by, and we were in our small apartment. I have 2 sons. And during that same month, my father died. And because of the timing with the pandemic, what happened to so many other families also happened to us, where we weren't able to be with him while he was dying. And then we weren't able to gather after he died, which was such a strange experience, and so distinct to that specific period of time. But also it was time for me to start writing this book, and I didn't have anything else to do. I was in my apartment all the time. So I started writing, and I had all these ideas that I had been working on. And then I also had all these emotions now. I was in this incredibly heightened emotional state with grief and confusion and worry, um, and love and disconnection from the world around me, and all of the things that all of us were feeling. And so when I started writing this story, I really felt like this book grabbed me and like pulled me in. And all of my novels have taken kind of a long time to write. The two books before Hello Beautiful each took 8 years. And I wrote Hello Beautiful in 2 years because really it's all I did. I like lived in that world. And I feel like a lot of my heartstrings and a lot of myself and a lot of what I was going through and worried about and hoping for are in that novel. And that is, that's my story for how I came into it and eventually came out of it. So if anyone has any questions, I am happy to answer rather. It would make sense for me to ask.
Yes. Hi, so I have a question. Can you tell us a little bit about the characters and how you developed them? Were they loosely based off of your aunt's sisters, since you mentioned that you frequent her house and her mom, your friend's aunts, I'm sorry, your
Mhm.
mom, her mom had six
Yeah.
sisters, because the sisters, they're also, complex. They're very close, but they all have different personalities, and their personalities are almost kind of contrast to each other, but they still remain close even with the different personalities. I'm just wondering how you came up with those characters.
Yeah, it's a great question. I knew Julia first. Like I knew that William was going to go to college for basketball. And then I knew that this like bossy, strong-minded young woman was going to decide basically that he was her boyfriend. And that was Julia. And that she was the oldest sister and that she was the one who tried to fix everyone's lives all the time and always tried to plan out her own. And I certainly know people like that. So she just like bullied her way into the book and was herself from the very beginning. Sylvie, so I knew from the beginning that William was somehow going to become involved with two of the sisters. I didn't know what that was going to look like. I didn't know if that was going to be romantic or just complicated. And I knew that Sylvie was the sister who was going to be the other, edge of the triangle. And so I wrote her next, really, like chronologically in the book is the way I wrote it, where I wrote a William chapter and then I wrote a Julia chapter, really to figure out who she was. And then I wrote a Sylvie chapter, really to figure out who she was. And the twins, Cecilia and Emmeline, it took me a while to sort of color them in as well as I could, because I knew they weren't involved in the story in the same way, and I wanted to explore what it was to be a twin, and yet I knew obviously they were their own distinct people too. And I ended up actually, Cecilia is almost my favorite sister. I like her so much. So it took a while for the twins.
I have a question. Um, in the very first chapter, you have shown Sylvie as a very compassionate character because when all the sisters were introduced at the basketball game, William was asked that how many siblings he had. When they heard that he was the only one child, Sylvie's spontaneous response was like, "Oh, we should invite him for a dinner because he must be very lonely," right? So
Mm-hmm.
in the book, and we have seen that she's the one who took care of William when he was sick and all this stuff, right? So and eventually they fell in love. So did you have the plan to turn the story the way in the very beginning, or as you went along with all the characters, you changed your mind? So in other words, I would say you had planned for something in the beginning and then you changed it that way.
No, I knew that Sylvie was the other critical sister and that somehow she was going to become involved with William. Um, she is very compassionate, but I actually think that reaction in the first chapter is one that really any of those four girls would have, because they grew up in like the opposite kind of home that William grew up in. There's so much love in the Padavano house, even though it's noisy and flawed and, you know, imperfect, that for them, the idea of being alone is sort of unthinkable, not to have the connection that they have with each other. It's more a reflection for all four of those girls of like the last thing in the world that they would want is not to have each other. And so they meet this lonely boy and they're kind of they're all horrified, and but Sylvie is the one who says, "Why don't you come in?" And that is key, of course, because she is she is like the other one who welcomes him into her life after Julia.
Thank you so much. I have a question from the audience. It says, this is the third time during our Literary Thursdays that I have heard a writer say how the characters in their books live with them and talk with them and develop alongside with the writing process. I'm so intrigued by this type of creative mind. How do you think such a thing comes about? Is it the way a creative brain works?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, if I knew that, I would have answered the creativity question that people have been asking for ever. I think it is a lot like, I assume if you are a passionate reader and you love reading fiction, the thing that I love best, I am a passionate reader of fiction. And if I read a book where I love it so much and the characters and the world feel real, and I'm so grateful that like this world has been revealed because it's true and it feels real and I believe it, and now it's part of me too because I read it. That's how I feel as a writer when I'm in the world with my characters. Like I do feel like I'm in a room with the Padavano sisters and I'm listening to them talk. And my choice is really like, do I write down everything they say, or do I just write down the pieces that we need to move the story forward, or to like not have every scene drone on and on and on? So it's like, I do think it's kind of like being a reader where you get to live in the world that you're reading. I get to live in the world that I'm writing, and it is real to me. I mean, these characters to me are real. So I think that's part of it, if that makes any sense.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Okay. Sorry, I'm having a little technical difficulties over here. So we were talking about characters before. I just want to mention that William was actually my favorite character. I don't know. I felt sad for him. I was mad for him. I just wanted to see him achieve, and just kind of find that I think family and love that he seemed like he was looking for. Um, Him getting with Sylvie didn't really bother me as much as I thought, being that she was the sister, because I felt like she was always the person that kind of understood him in a way. So my question is, when it came to William, I know you said you knew that it was going to be deal with something with basketball and things. How did his character come about? Like the whole thing with, with his family and them not really paying too much attention to him, and then him going to college, and what happened, I guess, at the end, or when he decided to leave the marriage and all that stuff. Like how did you decide that this was going to be his path?
Yeah. Two things. Well, one is that the way that how I feel when I'm writing is like I'm writing like each sentence like while holding like an emotional tuning fork. So I just keep thinking to myself, is this true? Does this feel true? Like, did what Julia said feel true to what she would say in this moment? Is what William said true? And that's the rewriting I do, is when I don't feel like I've hit a false note. And by the time I get to the end of the book, eventually, that means that every sentence in it feels true to me, and everything that the characters did is true. I have no idea if it's any good or if it works, but I know that it's true. And so that's what I had to do with William. And the thing is, what happens to William on the first page in the first paragraph, where his sister dies of pneumonia or the flu when he's a newborn, that happened in my mother's family, where it was a large Irish Catholic family, and one of my uncles was born the same week that his sister died, in the same way that this baby died. And my grandfather could never look at him. So I had seen this play out in my family, where this baby became a receptacle for the pain of the loss that he happened to coincide with, where his parents couldn't look at him without feeling their hearts break for something that had nothing to do with them, which meant that William grew up in a home without love. And even though he ostensibly, if you looked at his childhood from the outside, you would be like, he went to a fine school, he was clothed, he was fed, his parents are, middle class or upper middle class. But the whole infrastructure inside him is missing because no one loved him. And he doesn't really know what love is or how to experience it or give it. And so what I wondered when I was writing was whether someone who had that childhood could ever be okay. And I really didn't know if he could. So what I tried to do was follow him step by step. And when he sort of like descends into depression, I didn't know which way it was going to go. I was like, oh my God, like I have to do whatever's true. And if that means that he can't go on, then he can't go on. And I might be writing like the most depressing book ever. So I really don't know. I have to find out with him by trying to make sure that everything that he says and does feels true to what he's been through. If that makes sense. I love William too. I mean, I appreciate him being your favorite character.
Yeah, he was. Just everything that happened, I was so engrossed in his character. I kind of went around the others just to see, how it was going to turn out, if things were going to be better. I thought, and it actually kind of really made me mad with Julia, right? Because I feel like she kind of got married to William, but not really loved him. It was more of an image of a picture of what she thought her perfect life should be. And she kind of roped him into doing it, but not really seeing who he was or who he could have been if he had the opportunity to just come into his own and develop his own kind of personality and career goals, because she was pushing him so hard to be a professor. And it was clear that that wasn't his career goal. That wasn't at all what he wanted to do. But because he was looking for that love, he kind of went along with whatever she said. And when she just turned her back on him when he left and they were out searching for him, I was so mad. Like, this can't be serious. Like, this lady has to have some type of compassion, even if you didn't love him. He's your husband and your child's father. So, but I did think at the end, and so here's my question also, because the mom's character was kind of the same, but not the same, maybe like the same as Julia, kind of unattached, even with her marriage. Was that something that you wanted to kind of tie in? Because it seemed like they almost went down the same way. Like they had a vision of what they thought their life should be, what their husband should be. And then when it didn't happen, they kind of developed this disconnection from the husband. But I also felt like she kind of had a disconnect from her children as well.
Yeah. Well, so Rose, Julia's mother, I think they are very similar types of people in that they're take charge and like do what needs to be done and always thinks they're right and that they have the answer, etc. The thing with Rose is that she married Charlie because she became pregnant and she was young, and she might not have married him otherwise. So she feels she kind of trapped by the era that she was in into marriage and children. And what was interesting to me in writing those two women is that their freedom was defined by the generation that they were in. So for Rose, because of her age and the generation she grew up in, she got pregnant and she had to marry. Obviously, a generation later, Cecilia gets pregnant and does not marry, but that was not really an option for Rose. So she marries, and then from then on, her only route to what she would consider to be success was the success of her daughters, the perceived success of her daughters. And she had her idea of what that needed to be: a college degree, not getting pregnant, prior to marriage at an appropriate age. And when her children, in her eyes, mess up and don't succeed, then she feels like her entire life is a failure. And when her husband dies, that is the first time in her entire life that she has any shot at freedom. Like her kids are now, 20 and above, so they're old enough. Her husband is gone. She has no more responsibilities for the first time. And so she does something selfish. She leaves. But really, she hasn't been able to do that till then. Whereas Julia, a generation later, very similar to her mother, the kind of success she can achieve within her generation is that she is part of the first generation of women that become CEOs. That never happened prior to, the 1980s, 1970s, 1980s. And so she is able to be like, well, my idea of success is to do everything by myself and to be the best businesswoman and the best mother possible. And I don't need anyone. And there's real fallacy in that, and that ends up backfiring on her. But she's able to achieve freedom and success in a very different terms than her mother was able to. So like we are trapped and released by the time in which we're living. And those two women, lived in different times and so had different opportunities despite having similar personalities. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I have a question. I was wondering, going back to Shantae's comment last one, that according to the book, Julia was like very smart, she knew from the very beginning what she wants in her life, and she achieved accordingly, right? So my question to you is, why did you put it that way instead of her being compassionate and taking, when she realized that William was, like very undergoing depression and all this stuff? So why didn't she make it other way, like going to the doctor, get him out of it? And why did you choose, like you chose that path, that leaving him alone and then go, with Mike? I mean, it's not like her choice, but I'm saying, why did we think that way? Like, why did you portray that character that way instead of her being a little more compassionate?
I mean, I think a big part of it is that that was like the final straw for her realizing that she hadn't married the man that she thought she'd married. She hadn't married the man that she had dreamed up. Like who she had wanted to marry and who she told herself William was and who she told William he was not true. And obviously there had been signs for her for a while that he wasn't, and that he was sort of drifting off the path that she had set for him. But ultimately, when he does completely fall apart, she's faced with the knowledge that he isn't someone that she should have married, basically. I mean, and same on his side, obviously. Like they didn't love each other. In that love is seeing the person for who they really are and loving them. She did not see William for who he was. She had no interest in seeing him for who he was. So I think it's partly that, like, she looked at the situation and was like, well, I don't want to be with this. This isn't a man who I would want to be with, even if I get him back on his feet. And then also she had a baby at that point, and she was like, this is, he had handed her a check for $10,000, and this is an opportunity to really start over. And I don't want anything to do with this mistake that I made. And also she felt betrayed by him for turning out to be someone that, you know, wasn't part of their agreement. So I think with the baby in her arms and her life ahead of her and $10,000, it was just the clear choice for her, because she could see that he wasn't someone she wanted to be married with, even if he became healthy again.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There is a question somebody, Dan asked actually. Thank you for this book talk. Can you tell us a few of the most influential books on your life as an author?
Oh, sure. Gosh. Okay. Obviously, well, as an author, over the course of my life, there have been a number of books that had a huge impact on me. I read voraciously as a child, so I'm like, my DNA, I feel like, is built up of like the hundreds of books I read in elementary school, and books like Little Women that show themselves in this book, and The Yearling, and, you know, Nancy Drew and Trixie Belden and The Secret Garden, and all the sort of classics from elementary age literature. And then when I was in high school, I read The Golden Notebook by Doris Lessing, was a South African writer. And that novel is kind of like about female awakening and liberation. And the format of it is very unusual. There's a lot of journal entries in it, and it blew my mind. It was the first book I read where I was like, I didn't know this was possible. And then when I went to college, I had a few more experiences like that. I read Beloved by Toni Morrison and couldn't believe that a human being had written it. The short stories of Raymond Carver. There's one in particular called Cathedral that I had to read for a class. And it's about a blind man who comes to visit this sort of like normal, what he considered himself to be a normal guy. And it changes his life in the course of an evening. And I couldn't believe that could be contained in the short story. Henry James also had a massive influence on me. I read all of his novels, and the quiet awakenings and growth within people portrayed so quietly in Henry James's work was very impactful for me. I'm sure there's others that I'm not thinking of too, but that was how it felt until I was like 22 or 23. I just read sort of one thing, like stepping stones of reading a few things, and just felt like the lid of my mind came off. And it was so exciting to me what could happen in literature. And then since then, John Irving was also really important to me. I love sort of the big, baggy, deliciously plotted, amazing characters novels like his, A Prayer for Owen Meany, and The World According to Garp, and A Widow for 1 Year, I think it's called. Like, all those big books really had a big impact on me too. Now and Toni Morrison remains a staggering genius. And Anne Patchett, I loved her books from when I started reading them in my early 20s. Lauren Groff is a writer I admire greatly. Emily St. John Mandel, Elizabeth Strout, Colson Whitehead. Junot Díaz's book, can't remember the name of it. Junot Díaz's very famous book that I can't remember the name of also blew my mind. Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell is one of my favorite books. I mean, I read all the time. I'm always listening to a novel, and then I'm also reading a book. So the last class I taught, I told my students that I think at this point I'm about 70% fiction and like 30% person, because I'm always reading or listening or writing. So I live largely in a fictional universes, and that is what works best for me. That was a long-winded answer.
Thank you. That's a good answer. And was that book The Brief Wondrous Life of Oscar Wilde?
Yes, thank you. Yes.
And
I read I read that and Cloud Atlas back to back, and I just was like, I don't know how I'm going to go on. Yes.
And there is somebody, thank you for that answer. There is somebody in the chat who has their hand raised. So I'm going to unmute them, Crystal. So Crystal, if you have any question, feel free to ask it now.
Good evening. Are you able to hear me now?
Yes.
Thank you. Oh, and this is such an honor, a privilege to talk to you and see you. So I thank the library for bringing you to us. I'm in 2 book clubs, so I've read your book twice. And so I'm glad you gave the introduction that you did about how the book came to be, because I was wondering, I mean, basketball is the perfect sport, I think, for William, but I was wondering whether you had ever considered another sport like soccer, that he just needed a ball to go out to the park, play with by himself, yet eventually become a part of a team. So you answered that question already for me. So my question is, I love Kent. Now, as a Black woman, I think he's the perfect guy, the perfect friend for William. But I don't need to have a Black character in a book for me to love the book. There have been so many books I've loved where there are no Black characters or storylines. So I'm just wondering how Kent came into being. I don't know whether you explained that already in terms of the history of basketball and civil rights and Kent being kind of an outsider because of his race, but could you just explain, because I want to marry Kent. I think he's wonderful, and he's single now, so I guess I can marry him. But
You can marry him.
So if you can explain how Kent came into your life. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for all your kind words. That's very kind. And thank you for reading the book twice. I love Kent so much too. I really do. And he came in, you know, with William kind of obviously at Northwestern. He just befriended him and entered the book. And I mean, what can I say about Kent? One of the things that I realized, I had no idea why I wanted to write about basketball. I did explain, of course, like how I got led into my obsession with social justice / history of basketball. But I didn't know what I was going to do with that fictionally. Like, what did I want to explore inside of that on the page? And I think one of the things that I ended up exploring that ended up being very meaningful to me was the idea of being on a team, and how for like the misfits among us, and particularly, not to be too gender specific, but like for boys particularly, who can often be inarticulate about their feelings, etc., and unable to feel like they can share that with each other. Athletic teams need misfits. Like, you can't just have like the golden boys and the quarterback or the point guard, the star of the team, the really fast one. You need role players too. You need all sorts on a team. So misfits have a place there. They can find a place there. And the actual infrastructure being on a team means that these young men are given permission to care about each other because they're teammates. So they feel immediate permission to care. And Kent, I think, is very mature for his age as a young man when they're in Northwestern. And I think he just looks at William and sees his sweet heart, but also sees how broken he is. And he just like points his big love at him and is happy to be able to do so and to have a place where he can do that. and William loves him back. And, those teammates, Kent and a couple others, are there for William, for the next 30 years and show up for him, at the very end of the book and love each other as teammates. And then, in a way, as brothers. It gives another infrastructure for William. And I love Kent very much. And it's really important to me not to write books with all white people in them. That's not the world, obviously, that we live in, that I live in. And I want to write into the world, the beautiful, diverse world, complicated world that we live in, and not, anything beyond that. And in part, basketball allowed me to do that, because even at the collegiate level at that time, Black players were welcomed to a limited extent onto the team. And I, was able to move into different parts of the world than I could if I stay on a dead end, on a cul-de-sac with a lot of white families, which ironically is kind of what I'm writing now, but still the point stands. I love Kent, and I'm glad he's in the book. And thank you so much.
Thank you. So Kent was intentional. His race is intentional. And
yeah,
that's very helpful for me to know. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining us tonight, being here. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Crystal.
I'm just wondering, in real life, do you have a friend like Kent as to William?
Yeah, I do. I would say my friend Leah, who I mentioned, who I grew up with. And I think it's more, hopefully we all have a friend kind of like Kent, someone who sees you and sees who you are, and also sees your potential, like sees how great you can be. So that even when you feel crappy about yourself, your friend looks at you and is like, yeah, I see that you're crappy. Let's get ice cream. But like, man, you've got so much in the tank, like there's, this just points this like optimistic, but true and truthful love at you. I mean, Kent is amazing. So like, may we all have Kents in our lives.
Yes, definitely. And also, I was wondering, this book is not all about like love, romance, friendship, and all this. This book is also about mental health. So, do you like to add anything to that?
Well, I'm interested in writing about the full human experience and not leaving anything out. And it's not possible to do that without also writing about mental health, because even if you don't suffer yourself, you definitely have at least one person in your life who is struggling or has struggled with various mental health issues. So it's very much part of being human. And so I don't think about writing it in a way any differently than I do writing about joy. I want to make sure I get it right and that it feels true, but inevitably it has to be there.
I'm glad you said that. I just want to say that I think that was the one thing that I enjoyed about this book, is that it touched on everything, and it seemed like the characters seemed like your next door neighbors, people that you would meet on the street, a friend, a family member, whatever, right? They were dealing with real life issues, sisters that were close but still fought, parents that loved their kids but still, like you said, the mom was a little selfish. She decided to leave. Sometimes you have to take time for yourself. Friend connections, mental illness, what happened with William, just feeling down and depressed. And I think, especially since now we know you wrote this book during the height of COVID, I think a lot of people was going through depression at that time. People were losing family members. The world was kind of in a dark place. And when you think about William's mental stability, when he decided to leave his family, it was like he became in that dark place where he didn't see a way out. So everything in the book was something that someone can relate to as far as a real life issue. Coming to the end, having you know what happened with Julia. So I was a little sad at the end, though, I will say. At the death of Sylvia, I was a little shocked at that. I didn't really see that coming. I was hoping it would be a happy ever ending, but I think the time that he did have with her helped him to realize, you know, his importance in this world. So that was great for me. I was still a little sad about her death, but I also appreciated the fact that through her death, it brought Julia back into the kind of sisterhood, right? Because she had separated herself and decided to move away. And once she found out about her sister, she came back and, you know, reconnected with her other sisters. So, yeah, I thought this book was great. Did you, when you were writing it, did you always envision that the end would be Sylvia dying and, you know, William now having to contact his ex-wife to say about the sister? You know, was that always the plan, or it just came to you as you were writing?
I knew from the beginning that Sylvie was going to get sick and die. But I didn't know what was going to happen after that. I didn't know how it was going to end. Like, I didn't know what that was going to do to William, and I didn't know whether Julia would come back. I don't know. It was like that. I knew that was going to happen, even though I was so very sad about that from the beginning. I didn't want it to happen, but it felt like something that was going to happen and that did happen. And so it had to, and then I had to figure out what the ramifications of that was going to be. And I do think for William that in order to love her, in order to show his love for her when he finds out that she's dying, he has to set aside the last of, like, sort of the protections that he has inside himself for to love and to the rest of the world. He's only let Sylvie in, and because she's dying and because she wants and needs her sister, he has to open. And that opening and the risks he has to take inside of that prepare him to be in a relationship with Alice at the end, and also make him realize that love is not limited to one person. You can love more widely and receive love from more people, and that he can do that and deserves it, maybe even. So in a way, I feel like that had to happen for William to get to where he was by the end. If Sylvie was still alive, he would still just be like, I'm Sylvie's husband, and that's all I need. But loving her made him go bigger.
I was wondering, because the way you started the book about William and his family, his mom, dad, and his little portion of his life. I mean, 18 years of his life in one chapter. So I was wondering, but the rest of the book is all about Julia and her families and how his life. So why? My question, actually, I was thinking that why did you start the book with William's family instead of Julia's family?
I think I didn't know why I was doing that at the time. I mean, the idea I had in the beginning of the book was this lonely little boy dribbling a basketball. So that felt like where I needed to start the book. So I started the book there. What I think in retrospect was that what happens in the first paragraph of the book, in William's family, is this not tiny, but this quiet thing that happens in this small family. in the suburb of Boston. And that single event goes on to shape William's life. And then by extension, it also touches and affects all of the Padavanos' lives too. And that's how we connect with like the connections and the impact that we have on each other. And that something that happened like before you were born shapes your life, and then in shaping your life directly impacts the people that you open your heart to, is so interesting to me. So I think that's why, because the punch of that first paragraph reverberates through the entire book. Really, until William asks Cecilia to paint the picture of his sister, onto a wall. And that's, 40 something years later. So I think that's why. That's why I needed to start there.
Thank you. And also another question I would like to ask is, why do you think William left Alice? Like, is it because of his depression, mental illness, or he was insecure that she would be better raised by Julia instead of him? What what was in your mind? Like, why would you think he left?
Well, it's both really. I mean, because of his depression, he did not feel like he could be a force for good in Alice's life. And he fully trusted Julia to do a good job, because that's what Julia does. She does good jobs. And he didn't trust himself at all. And he was afraid that the blackness inside him would seep into her. And so he had to stay away, because he did love her and therefore had to save her from him, basically.
Yeah. Reading that, it was pretty interesting. I thought it I don't know if maybe that's what you're thinking. When I was reading it, I thought it had a lot to do with his upbringing and his parents, that maybe he felt worried that he would turn out, like them and be unattached in a way, like how his parents were. That's kind of how I felt when I was reading that. I can't say that I was shocked at his thinking, but again, that ties into the, I guess, emotional connection that I was getting for William. Like it was, I was like, this is sad that he feels that way, and he didn't have any support or an outlet to talk to, because he was really trying hard to please Julia, but falling deeper and deeper into the darkness, right?
Yeah.
But in the end, I'm glad he made it out. We do have a few comments and questions in the chat. So Jasmine says, thank you for your very thoughtful answers. And I hadn't heard of this book before, but I'm really looking forward to picking this up and reading. Angela also has a question. Would you change any parts of the book?
Oh, no. I mean, I don't think so. No. I mean, well, there were some errors. Like I got I had like a date wrong with Magic Johnson when he entered college. Like, and there's there were one or two not typos, but like sentences that had an error in them, and those have been fixed in the later editions. Kind readers wrote to me and told me where I had messed up. So things have been fixed, like tiny things though, not big things. Otherwise, I don't think so. Not at this point. I mean, maybe when I'm further away from it, I will feel that way, but I don't right now. I do feel like it's real and true, and so I can't really change real and true.
I'm going to agree with you on that one. Casper says, Banned Book Week is coming up. How do you feel about books being banned, and have any of your books gotten banned?
Yes, I think banning books is an atrocity. It has risen and fallen over history. It's often a sign of, a certain kind of politics that's trying to take away rights from the citizens. And it's incredibly important that our young people and older people are able to choose the books that they want to read from all of books. The idea of censoring the books that our young people read is really wrongheaded. As an example, I made a video for about banned books at one point, and I used Beloved, which is one of the books which I said that like blew my mind open. And that book has been banned repeatedly and is banned in many places now. And that, as like a white upper middle class teenager living in northern New Jersey, when I read that book, books are empathy machines, and they let you live in another person's a completely different experience in a completely different time, and to open your heart to that. And it's so enriching and so important, and no book should be off limits. And so, yes, and several of my books have been banned in Florida. I think Dear Edward has been banned numerous times, actually. And normal, in virtually every case, like a lot of the books that are banned, it would be like because a person of color is in it or a person of color wrote it, which is absurd and ridiculous and wrongheaded. In other cases, like for Dear Edward, I don't know why it was banned. Like, it doesn't make any sense, but it doesn't make any sense anyway. So I am incredibly strongly against it.
Okay. We have a few more just comments in the chat before we wrap up. Lee says, thank you for a wonderful book talk. Burrow, I'm really enjoying this discussion. I plan to read the book now that I have all of your insight. And Lisa, thank you so much. My book club recently read your book and it inspired much discussion. I'm going to agree because I also read this book during a book club. And yeah, it was a great discussion. I had a lot of questions, so I'm so glad that you came.
Well, thank you to all. It was wonderful talking to you and Indira as well. Thank you, Casper. Thank you so much to everybody who came, and thank you for having me.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us this week for Literary Thursday. We hope to see you next Thursday and the Thursday after. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.